One too many? Jack Korean made a point of never getting too intoxicated to defend himself, as a general rule. Tonight would be his 57th birthday, a date he only remembered because it was the first day of Wreath, a season of the complex calendar of New Hades. The war was over and it was time to relax. Jack had driven for days to the less populated land of Juhani for some relaxation. The devil came to a rumbling standstill outside a small cantina on the outskirts of Porgy, in rural Juhani. The strange music that echoed out over the small town was loud, even inside the cabin of the reasonably armored vehicle. Jack was already fatigued from the 12-hour stretch of driving. The auto drive seemed to make no difference to his level of fatigue, and did nothing for the tedium. The seasoned ex-bounty hunter was approaching old age and was quite aware of it when he lifted himself gingerly from the driver's seat. His overworked, elderly bones ached and crackled like sugar on a fire. "I wonder how much Florum costs in this dump," he uttered to himself ruefully. Jack then armed the modern and comprehensive defensive systems on the devil and stepped out into the poorly lit street. Vehicles of such obvious quality were rare in Juhani, and its presence caused quite a stir amongst the local youth of the area, many of which had not seen her equal. All-wheel drive, 8x8. Heavy armor. Is that diamond plating? It's euphorium, dickhead. Are you colorblind? It is from Impervian, you know. No, it is Detosian, you can tell by the design. The youths on the otherwise boring street would flaunt their ill-informed opinions for hours with regards to the formidable armored car. 3 tankards of Florum, don't make me wait. Grumbled Jack to the middle-aged local bartender, who felt reasonably secure behind a thick pane of diaglass. As you wish, replied the short, brown-haired Juhani with a sneer. What Jack did not know, however, was that local Florum was made with an extra ingredient, powdered black heart. The locals of Juhani were loath to drink it at all, and when they did, it was with trepidation from a half-filled shot glass. Jack had just ordered enough to trouble a native bull. "On the house," said the bartender, having a difficult time keeping a straight face as he handed them over. Jack was no fool. He knew that the drinks were suspect. When he reached the most dimly lit corner of the large room, he produced a vial of clear liquid from an inside pocket. Keeping the vessel concealed in the palm of his hand, he added a few drops of it to each tankard. It was a form of lithin that did not destroy the alcohol content of the drink, but eliminated any poison present. The problems he faced after that were because Black Heart, or Black Widow as the Juhani called it, was a hardcore natural narcotic, and not a toxin as such, and it was only partially neutralized. After 2 tankards, Jack was feeling quite unstable. His legs were shuddering and his eyes were becoming difficult to focus. From previous experiences, Jack knew that the third would surely spell unconsciousness. The flickering blue and purple lights, which Jack assumed were supposed to be a strobe, painted flashes on his vision that did not fade as normal. Bright luminescence was blinding him as he rose to his feet, attempting to reach his vehicle before seemingly inevitable collapse. He staggered and slurred under the effects of the exotic concoction. "Ihu ufuik kimba astards," yelled Jack wildly as he spun around the room. Even in the poorly lit environment, with the partial influence of the deadly cocktails, Jack could sense that the other occupants of the building were turning against him. Their faces were drawn into demonic-looking glares in Jack's eyes. He found himself becoming even angrier and more aggressive. "Bring it on," wailed Jack, struggling to remain on his feet. There were a few contenders, some of the local drug dealers and thieves. A wide variety of drilling, sever and volcanic flick knives and at least 1 revolving axe were drawn and began spinning and powering up. Jack was an experienced campaigner. He had fought under many adverse conditions, but this was by far the worst his body had been in for many years. Rupee lunged at the much older man with his 2 drilling knives. So amateurish was the attack, that Jack smirked despite the peril of his situation. He almost fell as he snapped Rupee's arm at the elbow. Why these people did not invest in decent armor, Jack did not understand. Outraged, Rupee's tall, blonde girlfriend decided to wade into the melee with a half-full bottle of Alpha Mead. Jack could hardly see it all as the main lights were switched on. He still managed to palm base strike her under the chin with enough force to snap her neck. Her head turned slightly and her body spun a little as it and the bottle plummeted with a crackling thump to the filthy steel bark floor. Some of the crowd was now reconsidering their aggressive stance toward the old foreigner, others were charging in. The bartender was safe and snug behind the extra shield of euphorium, which closed down atop the bar. Black Widow is a strange substance, derived from a particularly noxious fungus. It deprived Jack of the fine threads of conscience to which he usually gripped. There was no stopping him. He could have executed that maneuver blindfolded and underwater. The shotgun pistols were a blur, and then they were a harsh, large cyclone of flying solvent and burning explosive propellant. Large chunks of flesh were mixed with fragments of melting armor, glass and wood as Jack sprayed the interior of the building with his automatic weapons of choice. They never stood a chance. There was not a set of armor within 100 kilometers that could have stopped those salt slugs of chemical. Jack did not aim, but fired instinctively at the many dark silhouettes. When his deep magazines were empty, there was only 3 people left alive in the bar. One would die soon after. The bartender had retreated into his Drednium safe room, and one lucky boy was running, faster than he had run in his entire life, down the street. Jack collapsed onto one knee, and then, after 5 distinct attempts to get up, dragged himself towards the door. He reached the street, the darkness soothed his head slightly, and then he heard the Devil's engine start up. Diapharon and Red were in the cabin. Proficient car thieves were actually quite rare in Juhani, but the Devil had attracted 2 of the best in the entire country. Several youthful bodies lay around the area where the 8 skid marks began, victims of the 10,000 volts or so that was put across them by the vehicle when they attempted to enter. Diapharon had used an electronic scrambler to disable this defensive measure. Red was a specialist when it came to bypassing engine immobilization. He had only taken 3 or 4 minutes to mimic the electronic key with his tools. Both of them were aware of the pressure-sensitive seat that triggered the deafening alarm system. They had disabled it manually in a tense operation. Red, as his name implied, had a full head of fire truck red hair. His eyes were a deep brown, but not much color showed because of the high concentration in his blood of amphetamines. His pupils were like shiny black saucers. Diapharon was shorter, slighter and nastier than Red. His hair was naturally black and he had an assortment of amateurish tattoos on all parts of his body. With eyes of a sickly yellow-green and an ugly, scowling face, he was not popular outside his immediate circle of friends. They were both wanted by the Impervian, Tsulan and Juhani authorities, such was their notoriety. This was a great find for them. Although a civilian vehicle, Devils were purchased by poorer nations as frontline military equipment. Dia was rifling through one of the many compartments in the cabin when Red explained. "Purple lights up ahead. It's the swine. Off-road, now," ordered Dia in panic. The Devil lurched off the grey gravel road and onto the terrain it was created for. Its off-road performance rivaled the best light tanks of the world at that time. Unfortunately for the 2 thieves, it struck a large, carefully placed pit of hydraulic punjies and jerked to a sudden stop. Jack was beginning to feel the initial effects of the local florum. His vision was still dramatically affected, but at least now he could walk properly. He said nothing as he surveyed the area where he had parked his vehicle with what remained of his senses. The youths that were present moved aside when they saw him walking deliberately towards them. They had heard the gunfire from within the cantina. The police were nowhere to be seen. They had organized a roadblock for 2 wanted men further up the road. Within his thoroughly disorganized mind, Jack Korean swore that they would drag, much like that overlord what was his name? And remembered how he had caught up with 3 years ago and towed him behind the Devil until he literally fell apart. What the fuck was in that shit? He swore angrily as he walked. Following the tire tracks on gravel was extremely difficult. It was only that there were 8 of them, and that his armored car was relatively heavy, that the intoxicated ex-bounty hunter knew which way it had been driven. It had been literally hours of stumbling and staggering before he came upon the Devil. It was impaled like an ensnared animal, the pit of piston spikes, known as hydraulic punjies. The hull had not been significantly damaged and only 3 of the tires were punctured, but she was immobilized. The thieves, Dia and Red, were nowhere to be seen. Jack's senses had almost completely returned to normal when dawn began to encroach on the darkness. It was then that he realized that the interior had been stripped of almost all useful equipment. All of the ammunition for the .70 calibers was gone and his skimmer had been thrown onto the broken ground. Furious, yet containing his rage, Jack did not have to reassure himself that he would kill them, for this was obvious. He surmised that it just might have had to be a little slower than he first planned. The skimmer seemed undamaged, until he switched it on. It began squealing in an almost unbearable, high-pitched static whine. Jack adjusted the control knobs and then it lit up as usual, but in the background was an annoying static that surged every now and then. Juhani is on the verge of an import trade pact with New Jutia. Much agricole equipment will be traded for raw materials and weapons in the Histument. Fuck, bellowed Jack as he switched the skimmer off. Jack had a few chemical solid magazines left for his shotgun pistols. He stood well clear and severed the metallic shafts of the hydraulic punjies with well-aimed shots. They were sturdy and took several hits each before they melted enough and snapped. The Devil lurched forward and its wheels again gripped the earth. Jack and his vehicle drove off into the morning sun.